Tell me when.
It's going live.
Okay, so good morning. It's Thursday, April 7th, 2022. Time is 10:30, and we're turning to Bill H446, an act relating to miscellaneous natural resources and development subjects. We have Commissioner Walk with us and Councilor Vealing, both from A&R DEC. So good morning, Commissioner Walk. Good to see you. The floor is yours.
Good morning, and for the record, Peter Walk, Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation, for the next 8 days. The piece of news that's relevant here is that Mr. Vealing will be the interim commissioner upon my departure. So you're in good hands. He will be taking over sort of management of this issue, of this bill from our end. And so I'll provide some testimony today, and then he and I will tag team until my departure, and then hopefully if you have further work that needs to be done or further questions, we can answer them together.
Okay.
Can I just ask a question about how you're gonna do your PowerPoint?
Sure.
Is he gonna?
I'm not gonna give that PowerPoint. That was as background,
Okay,
because
Okay,
you have seen that PowerPoint multiple
Okay.
times now.
okay,
Yes.
I want to highlight the things that we would like to add to H446
Okay.
that have come up in the last year. So I'll just provide a little bit of history. That was to have for you to have as background, and you're welcome to add. We can go through underlying pieces of the bill if you'd like. You've had a couple of presentations from us. You've had a walkthrough from Ledge Council. There weren't a lot of questions then because they're pretty, sort of perfunctory changes. What I'd like to talk about is sort of since the time of introduction last year to where we sit today, there are a few things that we would like to add in addition. And so I also provided you with a Word document that kind of runs through those. And I think it's probably easier to just kind of go through those in broad strokes.
Okay.
And while you also have the language in front of you. So that's the Word, which is handing you now.
Thank you very much. Okay.
And so the starting at the beginning, the first one is about dam safety and the changes that were made a few years ago to require increased regulation of privately owned dams. We've been working diligently to move those rules along. And have been working with stakeholders on the specific pieces of those, and are in agreement with the stakeholders involved in that process to extend the rulemaking process out a year and the associated reporting out a year. We are at the same time in the dam program plussing up with the investment that you all made in state-owned dams to get those improvements done and that work out the door. We've added 2 staff to make doubling our staff to 4 to get that work done. But we want to make sure that the rules are done well, because it'll be a sea change in administration of privately owned dams in this state, and want to make sure that that's done well. So just ask for another year to work on that. So given that we have time to have that discussion, wanted to come forward and ask you for that change. So that's the first piece. The next.
Mr. Chairman, do you want questions as we go along, or should we wait till the end of the?
Let's march through and then flag stuff and come back, please.
Okay.
And then the next one is about the definition of a private pond, which is defined multiple times in statute and causes some confusion for us and for landowners in Vermont. And we'd like to clarify that one definition matters in 29 VSA, and that's setting forth back to 10 VSA 1442. That's a small one. We've had that discussion. It overlaps with Fish and Wildlife too, and we've had a discussion with them, and they're comfortable with that.
So I think we're gonna change our pattern.
Is that okay, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Okay, because
I was
as
gonna say,
they
I
come
don't-
up.
I don't know what 1442 is on it.
So what does this do exactly for the pond?
it just clarifies what constitutes a private pond for the purposes of permitting and other things. In different parts of statute has had different, whether it's entirely privately owned, whether it has some source of breeding ground for other things in a way that makes those things that are at the margins particularly challenging. And
So what's happening now and what would this actually do? That might be the way. So for example, I'm thinking we all have family and friends in the state that have ponds. What is it that they're doing right now that this might change?
so this is more about a pond that is not a sort of man-made pond that exists on any people property. It's more about a body of water that exists that is sort of doesn't have public access to it or whatever, that kind of is on somebody's property. Like if you owned all of the land around Lake Parrot, like what would that body of water be? And there are different ways of defining whether would be a private pond depending on where you look at statute. And so we so John, you want to jump in?
Peter, if I could, I can give kind of a concrete example that we're dealing with. So there's a pond in southern Vermont, and it's entirely privately owned. The entire shoreline is owned by private property owners. But there's also a hydrologic connection between various streams that are also that supply fish to the pond. So under the statute that governs Fish and Wildlife's jurisdiction, that's relevant, right? Because if there's fish coming from off-site, they retain the authority to basically issue fishing licenses. But it makes really no difference to us, in terms of lake encroachment permits, whether or not there's a viable source of fish coming into a pond. So presently, technically, we're supposed to use the Fish and Wildlife type approach. It doesn't make any sense. So we really don't do it. We don't look at that. We just look at ownership. So this just cleans that up. It's consistent with what practice is, and it makes things less confusing.
Thank you. And so, Chair McCormick, I'm gonna backtrack. It doesn't really make sense to go past something that's confusing. So if you want to ask your question on the dams, then let's pick it off while we're in the neighborhood.
This is not specific to the text, but it's on the issue. The auditor's study and the public is somewhat alarmed at hearing that we have a lot of dams that are not in good shape. I'm hearing from constituents, just briefly, because we do have legislation here, but just, since we're on dams, are there any dams that are a threat to life right now?
So that's not a straightforward question. So there are dams, we classify dams in two ways, right? Their hazard potential, as in what damage could they do? And those are from high hazard down to low or minimal, whatever it is. High hazard being those that create potential for loss of life. And then we classify what condition they're, right? And so those that, if you had a high hazard dam in poor condition, that would be sort of where you would suggest there'd be problems. We are, certainly that's something that we look at in great detail, because we obviously have seen dam failures elsewhere. The ones that we're primarily worried about in those contexts are things like Waterbury Dam, that we are working with the federal delegation to make investments in to keep from having it be an issue. Up until a couple of years ago, when you passed legislation that gave us more regulatory hooks over privately owned dams, we didn't have a ton of authority to ensure that when we told somebody to fix their dam, that it happened. And so that's what we're in the process of rulemaking on. There's a lot of nuance to that. And so I understand the auditor's concern, and we share the concern about sort of the state of play. But I think if he did that report 2 years from now, when we've gotten to the point where the rules are done and we've cleaned up some of the database pieces that he highlighted, we'll be in a much better place, and in a place where we can effectively regulate privately owned dams to the point where Vermonters would be less alarmed. And I will add, especially as, a parting shot, we added 2 staff that are limited service positions with the general fund dollars that you invested last year. We would like to make those permanent so that we have more full-time staff to be able to do this work, to go out and do inspections and to support dam safety in general. And it's something we look forward to bringing to you likely in the next budget cycle.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry. So we're dealing with not the 200 plus or minus mill ponds around the state, like Brook, the one in Brookfield, or like that were built for industry long ago and are now part of communities and beaches and waterfronts. We're dealing with, I've got one that's like the size of 2 tennis courts put together.
Are you
On my property.
dams or ponds here?
It's a pond. It's got a standpipe in it. And that's what we're doing.
Depends, right? So in the instance, the example that John talked about is a much larger than your standard sort of private, constructed swimming hole essentially. But it is about the nature of the way it interacts and to make sure that it's clear to those who own these, what their obligations are. And so that's clear. All right, the next topic is about the state revolving loan funds for clean water. And this is a discussion that we've had, I think, a couple of times with you all, and it hasn't quite gotten there. The federal government allows for the loaning of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund loans to private entities for the purposes of addressing failed or inadequate septic systems. We have, as part of the ARPA appropriation that you all did last year, there was a small grant program created to assist homeowners with addressing failed septic systems. In the 3 weeks or 4 weeks since we announced that program, we have gotten 1,000 inquiries.
Wow. I just ask a quick question about that. How did you announce it? Just out of curiosity.
Normal press release,
Really?
word of mouth, lots of news stories, but yeah, 1,000.
I'm suspecting that there's a lot of people for whom this is sort of a secret worry. And you're uncovering a lot of sort of failed systems and anxiety out
So
there.
there are a few things that we're hoping to accomplish, right? We're in discussions about whether or not we should shift some of the ARPA dollars around to move more grant money there, because the $2 million or so we have for it now, maybe it's $1 million, is gonna fix about 40 of those systems. So the other, so as a reminder, this is both for on-site wastewater and for drinking water systems. So it could be a failed well or a well that's run dry or what have you. So these are low-income Vermonters who are in need of basic systems. So one of the other tools that we could bring to bear with a change in statute is the ability to use an SRF loan, so a low interest loan to support that work. And it may not be a perfect fit for everybody, but it gives us another tool to help Vermonters fix their systems. We do have one existing loan program that has certain obligations tied to it that is probably insufficient, given the need, but it also, I'd love to see this change happen. So if we can get more dollars headed this direction, and more grant dollars headed this direction, there's the ability to tie some of these things together. So we can, if you're an average Vermont homeowner who's got a failed septic system, you come talk to us, or you come talk to whoever are acting as our agent and say, I would like to get this fixed. One set of paperwork or one, application process could yield you both a grant and a loan to fix the whole thing. Because our grants are not likely to cover the full cost of these replacements, because they're expensive.
Right, because this is a tremendous amount of need. If 2 million does 40, that's $50,000 a piece.
So we must be at $1 million.
How
a
much
lot of the
apiece?
ARPA,
That'd be 50.
I think we committed 19 or 29,000 a piece per system.
Okay. So, if we stick with 20, and then you have 1,000, then you have $20 million worth of need.
Yeah.
So,
So if we were to take, say, 10 and stretch that with loan capacity so that, people still, would still have some that they would have to pay for, but we would make the borrowing process easy for them, right? There's an opportunity there. So it's not something that we need to do. It's not something that people are necessarily going to build themselves up. We want to have that option and tool available to us that the federal government allows for.
May I ask? Sure.
oh, sorry, yes.
So you're not looking for more money to go into the program?
No,
I mean, that seems to me like the way I would love to go, but are you saying that there's just not funds there or?
so I'm not saying in this capacity. So we are in discussions about whether or not it makes sense from the broader ARPA clean water money to shift more to this.
Okay.
That's a separate conversation. This
That you
is
guys
sort of,
have internally?
it's starting to happen in this building.
Okay.
Julie is leading that. This is more of the suspenders to go with the belt of support to Vermonters here. So it is necessary to do this separately in order to have that additional tool, but it is not the only way in which we're proposing to address the significant needs.
And I'd love to hire your marketing person for my reelection. Oh my
We'll
God.
have Adam Miller come talk to you. And then, I gotta go through here. Anyway, so the next piece we wanted to talk about is the reclassification of water bodies. As you may or may not know, we classify each water body in the state, and there are different classifications, A1, B, A2, B1, B2, sort of pieces that the data, the monitoring data that we do supports. That said, there is a process by where we get petitions for people to have their waters reclassified. We just completed one for the town of Ripton, where their Conservation Commission requested that we reclassify several high elevation streams where the monitoring data suggested that was appropriate. In statute, that affords certain additional protection, statute and rules. The primary one that is often brought up in our in sort of the work that we do in this space is a concern about what's we affectionately call the 1,000 gallon per day design flow limit for a septic system. What that does is essentially stand in as a sort of prohibition on major development activity in a Class A watershed, which, I can understand the reasoning for it. But when we now have several petitions in to reclassify lakes in the Northeast Kingdom, Maidstone Lake being one of them, where the monitoring data suggests that the lake has reached Class A1 status, and we would like to be able to do that. It's a good thing and make sure it gets a higher level of protection in the future as other things happen. But there also happens to be an incredibly popular state park facility on that lake that needs a new septic system. And also there's a significant interest in providing, say, a new sort of cabins available for people to rent, to make more opportunities for Vermonters to equitably access the outdoors.
Where is this?
This is a Maidstone Lake up in North. Under this provision, currently in statute, that state park would not be able to make those changes to its incentives. They'd be able to replace what exists, but they wouldn't be able to serve the growing demand from Vermonters for camping opportunities and other things that fit well with the other uses on the lake. And which frankly, the homeowners association, or the lake owners association, which put in the petition, is supportive of. And so it creates an interesting dynamic where I would like us as a regulatory body to see our monitoring data, say, okay, this is what the data suggests that this should be classified as, and move that classification as a course of business. But the sort of local opposition that springs up around this particular issue makes it really challenging to get the buy-in locally fully to make that happen. And so what we've proposed is to set a date certain by which that 1,000-gallon limitation would no longer apply. And I'll tell you why I think that's okay. So if we're talking, these are for new systems that require permits. So after July 1 of 2022, that prohibition would cease to exist in our proposal. Our permitting process now for septic systems is sufficiently rigorous and has the goal in mind of not impacting surface water quality. So we design systems specifically to avoid the concern that the prohibition is designed to address. So
Basically, no discharge.
correct. And so it is attempting to achieve something that I can understand, right? Not wanting to have rampant development somewhere.
Yeah.
But prevents sort of changes that could actually have improvements to water quality, right? If you have an older system that could be replaced, you know, we have another one of our positions we have right now is for Caspian Lake. And the Highland Lodge sits on Caspian Lake.
Yeah.
I'm sure at some point they're going to want to modernize that system and modernize, you know, and make changes to their structure. They are a good steward of the lake, and yet would be prohibited from making those sort of adjustments to their flow that could support, you know, additional bathrooms or whatever in their facility. And so it's just, to me, it doesn't, there are other checks to development, right? If it's a sufficient size, it's going to go through Act 50, and then that can be a discussion point. If there are other requirements in place, this to me doesn't actually address the concerns and causes other ones, and therefore keeps us from sort of diligently going through the normal reclassification process, because there's local opposition, and these are supposed to be things that people are excited about the changes.
So is Caspian currently not being one?
What's it?
Caspian is
Currently not classified now.
So their ability, if they were to upgrade, then not be too destroyed, but at a place like the Highland Lodge wouldn't be able to do anything other than basically replace just what they have. So you're saying that from the beginning, this 1,000-gallon provision or threshold was really a sort of backhanded way of regulating development as opposed to a sort of front-handed way of regulating it through something else. What's the something else that would guide, you know, the decision making, so that once that, well, now that this is gone, what I really want is a 482-room hotel on the shores of Caspian. How does that work?
Well, I mean, a development of that size is going to get Act 50 review. So you're
What's
gonna
this
have-
Act 250 speak of?
I don't know. I don't work on Act 50 anymore.
So there are other things.
There are other ways in which you, the legislature, and local communities have determined that they want to make sure that the development that occurs matches their local and state interests. That this is simply, to me, this is not it's not the appropriate use. I can certainly understand why it's a stand. I mean, a 1,000-gallon system on its face is a big thing. It's a 6-bedroom house, right? It's a way to say we don't want a 6-bedroom house somewhere, you know, a giant McMansion on the top of the mountain. That's different from the ramifications that it creates for a state park, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same, you know, but it's the same binding statute.
And may I, and I can't, I really appreciate this and certainly trust your opinion on these things, but so we're not doing this for anybody. This is just general, your observation as commissioner that this makes.
It's my observation as commissioner,
Yeah.
and where, you know, staff would like to be going in terms of taking monitoring data that we have coming in that's part of our technical basin planning effort
Yeah.
to then move water bodies to their appropriate classification and protecting.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
I just want to make sure,
Thank you. And I wasn't questioning,
Yep.
you know, I was just trying to.
when a body of water is upgraded,
Yep.
it therefore gets a higher level of protection.
Correct. So if you
And
were,
in this case, the higher level of protection precludes what would actually probably result in cleaner water.
so there are the levels of protection that occur when your water body is a class A1 will, you know, typically relates to things about the way in which we regulate discharges into that water body, right? Which would be regulated to a tighter standard than a lower classified water body will be. What you did in statute was to add additional restrictions to that beyond the sort of Clean Water Act regulatory approach.
Because it's a higher quality water.
Because it's a higher quality water.
Okay, now the Maidstone campground that you,
Yep,
they're not planning on expanding.
they are. Yep.
Oh,
Not expanding significantly, adding.
adding more sites.
Adding, you know, in a environmentally sound way, the ability for more Vermonters to access. the
Yeah,
facility, right?
And more campers and more use.
Yep. So if you can imagine that as being a good public policy benefit, right, to expand the access to our state park system, we want to support that, and they would be limited by the current statute in the changes that they could make to their system.
That they're not allowed to do it, or that
There's a-
the size, the increased septic system triggers,
It's a prohibition,
it's a prohibition.
yes.
Gotta live with that for, so to sleep on that.
Class A waters were the honor roll of waters. Are we, what are we doing to our grading system?
Yeah.
You're still keeping the statutory prohibition on a wastewater treatment facility in a class A water. There's still a rule-based prohibition on any solid waste facility in those waters. And so there are still significant protections, additional protections beyond what we described in place. This is simply one where I understand the intent. I don't think the actual language was having the water quality benefit that it was hoping to have, and causes some challenges.
So it's just sort of a little bit of grade inflation here.
I think we gotta go back and look at what our expectations are for our students at certain points.
That's not the metaphor for what I'm thinking.
Okay, so any more discussion on this before we go on to the next one?
Just the metaphor I would use is the kid who gets straight A's gets bumped up to an honors class, which means they get harder work. Which may not seem like a reward.
I think I've gone somewhat out of order here. My
Okay.
document went, but I only have two more.
Okay,
The next one, and I think I got a little out of order here because my document got a little screwy, but,
I see that later on is the one that we were just talking about septic.
yeah. So there's a salvage yard, proposed change in here, and I'll use the specific, we often get, communication from local officials and from many of you about, challenging unregistered salvage yards in your districts.
And most of us might say, well, there's a lot of junk vehicles in someone's yard, that kind of
Yes,
thing.
so yes, you call us to say there are, 10 vehicles parked along the side of the road that clearly aren't registered. And, when we go in to investigate, one of the challenges that we come up against is that it's appropriate for those to be closed. But what we would love to see the opportunity to do is to take so this is a very specific thing, but many of the cars, if they had to be shipped off whole, it would be very expensive to deal with, and then therefore the landowner can't deal with it and nothing happens, right? It just stays in this bad situation. Whereas if we could bring a mobile, with a landowner could bring a mobile car crusher on site to reduce the footprint of their shipping requirements, it would significantly assist us in addressing some of these problem children sites.
I'm gonna start drawing up a list for you.
You would not be the first one. So this is one where it's only at the sort of, with notification to the secretary, they'd be allowed to, for the purposes of closure only, bring in a mobile car crusher to a unregistered facility.
Okay.
And then the final piece is in the previous edition of the bill, we brought the idea of some changes related to the clean water investment reporting pieces that were around sort of updating where we are in the status of clean water work. Right? We're past phase 1 of the TMDL implementation framework, those sorts of things, to try to make adjustments there. We have a few more of those to add that really get to trying to just make sure we're, sort of the statute aligns with where we are. So if there are reporting requirements that are no longer necessary because of where we are in the status of things, right? We've moved along in the planning and implementation phase, that we simply update that to reflect those things. So I'm happy to answer more questions on those, but they really are, for the most part, fabulous. And then there's one date change relative to the phosphorus trading report. We simply would like some more time. And we may get it done before that deadline, but we, figure it's, rather than potentially be late, we would come after now.
Okay, so this is the recommendation on nutrient credit trading.
Yes.
Senator King?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess this is a question for the chair. So this is our vehicle for any other small kind of cleanup stuff that we might need or want as a committee or individually. And I'm wondering, just thinking about individual districts and certain needs, when do you hope to move this? This is the house miscellaneous bill.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think of this as the annual housekeeping bill.
No, sure.
I mean, to be honest, I hadn't necessarily thought of it as
Okay.
a vehicle for anything else. I just wanted to make sure, I mean,
Well, it could be a vehicle for other things. Is that accurate or no? Would you prefer it
I mean,
not
that's
be?
always a possibility.
Okay.
I'm sure that it makes the agency cringe if you start
No, I don't,
getting controversial things on it, but if it's a question of logistics and moving things, then.
yeah.
But my thought was that we, whenever we have an agency in our jurisdiction, that I guess I would say, we owe it to them to help them get their housekeeping stuff done. And, some people might debate whether it's housekeeping or beyond that, but at any rate, so it's on our list to move in a timely way. And if you have thoughts, then I'm happy to learn more.
I would be remiss, so this is a set of changes that the original bill included some changes for the Natural Resources Board to make their online permitting system more functional.
Okay.
And the House decided not to include those. And I'm talking to Chair Haskell and Allison Stone, their general counsel. They were interested in still pursuing those.
Okay.
And so I would encourage you to have them in to hear what those changes were. They really relate to sort of how applications come in.
I mean, they were gonna modernize their,
Yeah, they're monitoring. So
Database
one of the issue is the notice for an application. Currently the burden exists for that with the applicant, which makes sense from a logical standpoint. But if you have a system that you can apply online and automatically creates notice, right? Then it's just as easy to have the NRB do that, right? And so that was really the sorts of changes they're looking to do to take full advantage of their modernization.
do you know if they received funds for that software investment they would need to do the tracking and application processing and all that?
I believe they did,
Okay,
but
all right,
that
so
would be a good question.
we will keep our eye on the shot clock, but not rush, so that we can hear more about what Senator Campion's thinking, as well as inviting the NRB.
Yeah, and I don't have anything in particular. I was just thinking, as it relates to vehicles,
Yeah.
final last hurrah. I don't want to jeopardize anything that, needs to get done. Was there anything else that didn't make it over that was in the original? I'm just
The
curious.
no, not in the original. Well, so we struck one thing that we wanted to do while in committee that we thought more about, and got rid of.
Okay.
The House added a couple of things in there related primarily to the Solid Waste Management Assistance Fund, which we were comfortable with. And then they added build-back authority for fish and wildlife through the active duty process, and then took it out again themselves. So it had its bit of dirt. So yeah, there's
Really
nothing.
the other piece.
There's nothing missing in there that, from our perspective, that's hugely concerning.
Thank you.
And I appreciate your time. I know you have lots of very heady topics that you're dealing with, and sometimes these can feel minor in nature, but they are really, for the good government side of the work we do, they're really important. So express my appreciation for the staff for taking this up.
Sure, we're happy to work on it. And Senator Campion, when you have that amendment to add the bottle bill.
No, really, I was just thinking as it relates to other movement of other things, but I do respect, like what you said, this bill in particular, sometimes miscellaneous bills can have other bills in them, but this is more of a, like you said, technical cleanup and priorities for all of you.
Not to speak completely out of school, but I will, because it's fun. The reality is there's nothing in this bill that is of high priority enough to anybody outside of the two of us and our staff to have it be something that, you're gonna make a lot of hay and hanging things on, I hate to say.
All right,
Yeah, got it.
so good to see you.
Is this the last time we're
I
gonna see
think
you?
this might be your last visit to this committee. Depends on how well we behave. Is that-
That's what.
I have no, official or unofficial chiding to do.
Right, well, we won't get cheerful yet. All right, so thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thank you.
And I am sorry for being a little bit tardy, but.
Listen,
If you had been on time, we would have kept you waiting.
But now I've kept somebody else waiting, I'm sure.
no,
But I
Time of year.
appreciate the time, and I know you all are very busy, especially as the end has come upon us sooner than we.
well, we appreciate all of your work. I mean, I in particular with all your work down in Bennington County, immensely grateful. Immensely, yeah.
Thank you, Chris. And anyway, so I will likely not, I may, if we need me to come back in here next week to talk about this or other things, I'm happy to do that. But I probably will not see you again until next session otherwise. Official role.
Yeah. We'll see you at the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Cocktail Party in mid-May.
Still waiting for my invite. All right.
Thanks so much, and
Thank
it's
you.
been a pleasure to work with you.
Very much so.
Don't see you again, so thank you. Vermonters don't know how many things you've been doing.
Yeah, and how lucky we've been.
Okay.
Very much.
So with that, we're gonna, it is a day of moving right along. So we're gonna move to Bill H 466, inoculating to surface water withdrawals and interbasin transfers. And I'd like to go first to Mr. Carpenter. Familiar face to me, good morning. Sorry for that we're in squeeze play mode here, and so we're running a little behind. So if you could just introduce yourself to the committee and for the record, and we'd like to hear what you have to say on the water bill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice to see you. And appreciate you allowing us an opportunity to testify. I'm Brian Carpenter, the chair of the Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance. I also am a primary owner of Champlain Valley Equipment and the chair of the Middlebury Select Board. So we'll be dealing with H 466 on a number of levels. Today, my testimony would be how it would potentially impact the dairy producers within the state. And as an interested party, I thought it was important that we at least get the testimony on the record as you look at this bill. The Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance is comprised of dairy farmers of all sizes and partners of the farming industry. The alliance works together with members, industry partners, and state government to adopt regulations that won't cripple the economic viability of the Vermont dairy industry while being mindful of the environmental impacts to Vermont's working landscape and waterways. VDPA does not support H 466 and has the following concerns that I would like to share with you.
Okay, Mr. Carpenter, sorry to interrupt. Have you seen any of the amendments to the bill?
I understand. I've seen the different amendments up until the one that has just been posted. And I understand that amendment may take into account some of yesterday's testimony. And I know Ryan had some good testimony from the Ag Agency. And so, but I haven't had a chance to review that yet. I just found out about it.
Okay, well, sure. And there's another amendment coming through today. We're on sort of a rapid turnaround cycle for taking testimony and making further amendments, particularly as it relates to impacts on the farm community. So I just want to make sure that you know it's still a work in progress, and that we'll want to make sure that you see the most current amendment as we continue our work.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that fact because frankly, I'm looking at it from the global agricultural perspective here within Vermont. It's a community that's near and dear to my heart, as you realize. And so some of these comments you may have already addressed. And as I said, I hadn't seen the amendment that's coming forward today.
Sure.
One of our concerns is the bill adds another layer of reporting, and agriculture already has a complex reporting system through the required agricultural practices. And because of that, they have a very strong relationship with the Ag Agency on a recurrent basis. And this would then create a reporting channel through to Natural Resources. And it would be really nice to simplify and have everything through one channel if it becomes a requirement. As Ryan testified yesterday, we do not support the definition of surface waters to include springs because below ground springs fill our ponds used for irrigation and feeding livestock. And you may have addressed that because I did follow your discussion, with his testimony yesterday in trying to understand the differences in the competing definitions within state statute. Vermont is a riparian state, which allows landowners to withdraw surface water from waters that abut or cross their land as part of their property interest. And the withdrawals cannot have a negative impact on neighbors. This bill effectively removes that land right if a permit program begins in 2026 as planned by requiring a landowner to obtain a permit for a fee to use the water. Also, surface water withdrawals are an important tool for climate resilience planning for agriculture based on trends predicted for future rainfall in Vermont. And the Vermont precipitation has been increasing, not decreasing. So this should minimize the concern of withdrawals. If this bill is focused on climate resilience planning, it should take all users into account in the same program to plan for apportionment. Snowmaking should be included with all users in any program created by this bill, so all withdrawals can be looked at together. And lastly, if the committee wants to move forward with a bill, we would ask that you consider requiring reporting only without creating a permit program. This information would help the legislature understand how watersheds are impacted and if a permit program is indeed needed. We believe this bill is a solution looking for a problem, and we ask the committee to gather data from all industries about surface water withdrawals in Vermont as a first step in analyzing water usage. Allowing a permit program to be developed when you do not have the sufficient data could potentially do more harm than good. And Vermont farmers have made and continue to make huge investments in improving water quality, and these investments have shown tremendous results. Certainly, we would like to keep the money going towards what we're showing is a very productive improvement in our practices already. I will have a written testimony delivered to you for your record also, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And that way too, we can post it, and anyone visiting the website, other times can pull up your testimony. So that too is helpful to other people. Any committee questions for Mr. Carpenter?
Thank you for your service to the town of Middlebury.
Well, thank you. We've been very fortunate. Things have been going well down here. Thanks for all of your support in our bridge and rail project that finished up recently and has been a really nice addition to our community. We're looking forward to having transit Amtrak start the middle of the year here.
Great.
One of the initial riders.
Terrific.
Yeah, the big dig is over, and everyone's people are pretty happy with the results. But it was a long project.
How long was it? Did it go? It's been years.
4 years.
4 years. Okay.
Yeah. And for local merchants, those were dog years. They were like, felt like 28.
Right.
Okay, so thanks so much. I think I'll make sure that you get a copy of the next amendment. And I think because we've addressed some of the things you're talking about, and for instance, snowmaking, someone had said, well, why isn't snowmaking reporting? They actually have a very, much more regulated and rigorous permitting and programming system all of their own that runs outside of what's being contemplated here. So they don't appear in this bill, but they are, because it's been an important factor in, running a ski area for decades. There's a lot of programmatic support, permitting requirements, et cetera, about how the impoundments are filled up, when they're filled up, and for snowmaking ponds. So, all right, well, if there are no committee questions, then I'd love to turn to the agency, which also wanted to present more information to us. And Mr. Crocker, good to see you this morning. So you've been hearing that you've seen the amendment so far, and I think questions have come up. So we're happy to hear your response to any proposed amendment you've already seen, and to hear what the agency's further proposals of amendment might entail in response to what you've already seen on our side. And good morning, Ms. Shonda too. So I don't know how you want to, if you want to go in sequence, tag team wrestle, the floor is yours. Use it as you like.
Okay. For the record, name is Jeff Crocker. I'm the Stream Flow Protection Coordinator, and I was also the chair of the Act 173 study group that put forward the proposal that became H466. And if it's okay with the committee, I want to talk specifically, maybe take a few steps back and provide the committee with some information about, from a stream flow perspective, of why this issue is important, and the information of what the ecological impacts are on aquatic ecosystems through withdrawals. I feel like that's a missing part of the narrative that's been presented so far. And then we can share our thoughts on the proposed amendment. Specifically, I would like to focus my testimony on the inclusion of the language that averages withdrawal over a 30-day period and my concerns about that. And then I think we can take a step back, and maybe I'll help, with the help of Jordan, move through some of the amendments and give you, the committee, some thoughts and answer any questions they have on that, if that's okay with you, Chairman Bray.
Certainly, and just for pacing, we have approximately half an hour.
Okay. All right. So to begin, as I said, I want to focus on what the effects are of water withdrawals. To do that, I want to first focus and give the committee more of my background in stream flow, river ecology, so there's an understanding of where this is coming from. For approximately the last 10 years, approximately, I've worked with the Stream Flow Protection Program, DEC. 8.5 of those, I have been the supervisor and the coordinator of the program. Again, this program is responsible for ecological impacts of water dam operations on Vermont surface waters and issuing determinations to ensure these activities are done in a manner that is compliant with the Vermont water quality standards and other environmental rules. Prior to joining the Stream Flow Protection Program, I spent a number of years researching the direct and indirect effects of flow of stream ecosystems for Environment Canada. The research specifically on the direct and indirect effects of water withdrawals on stream ecosystems and their biota. It is from this position as an ecologist, a scientist, and a regulator that I'm sharing my opinions on the proposed amendments to H466. And following the testimony on H466, there's been much focus on what it means for the person withdrawing water from the stream. This is understandable, as understanding how this decision affects our farmers and our regulated community that rely on water is an important part of the process. But I want to provide the committee with the background on what the effects of water withdrawal are on stream ecosystems themselves, the biota, and the fish that inhabit it. While the benefits of using surface water are obvious, the impacts of water withdrawals on surface waters are not, with a common misconception being, as long as the stream has water, there's no impacts. This is not the case. From my perspective as an ecologist and a scientist, I consider stream flow and water level master variables in aquatic ecosystems. It determines not only the amount of habitat available, but the quality of that habitat. For organisms to carry out important life history events such as reproduction, migration, dispersal, all needed to sustain healthy populations in our streams and surface waters. Removing water via withdrawals has a direct impact on the amount and the quality of that habitat for fish and biota that depend on them to sustain life. Removing too much water during periods of low flow causes additional stress on fish and other biota due to difficulty in moving to obtain resources, or cause territorial conflicts amongst individuals of the same species, or inadvertently competition amongst species with over resources. All these impacts have stress on the ecosystem and may lead to local mortality of aquatic biota. Additionally, there are indirect effects on flow alteration through the removal of water. Typically, water withdrawals occur during times of low natural precipitation. It can coincide with high temperatures. Reducing flow during these times may result in increased water temperature, as reducing stream flow decreases the volume of water available to buffer against higher air temperatures. Many Vermont species have adapted to relatively cold climates and cold water systems. They rely on cold water for their survival. An example of this is the native brook trout, which has a relatively low tolerance of temperature, which causes stress, caused at a temperature of 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and can become lethal at 70 degrees Fahrenheit if that condition persists. Many of the species are already experiencing stress due to climate change and warmer temperatures. Increasing water withdrawals during warmer months may exacerbate the high temperatures and again lead to mortality. Another indirect effects of flow alteration is the effects on the dissolved oxygen level, another critical component to sustaining aquatic life. Warmer water holds less oxygen, and these levels become too low, they will not be able to support the many cold water adapted species in Vermont streams. Brook trout again becomes stressed, and mortality from insufficient oxygen levels have been documented occurring at levels of 3 milligrams per liter in 1 hour. Again, these conditions have potential to cause stress on stream ecosystems, biota, and may result in mortality. These concepts that I've shared with you are recognized by the Vermont Water Quality Standards, and they're how the program, the Stream Flow Protection Program, worked for years. They're codified in the hydrology criteria in the Vermont Water Quality Standards, the temperature criteria, and the dissolve criteria. And they directly influence how we issue these determinations and prescribe flows and operations to maintain the aquatic and ecological integrity of our surface waters. In issuing determinations, we are interested in the instantaneous flow in a stream, and we prescribe these flows based on Vermont Water Quality Standards and agency rules. This is to avoid situations that I've previously described. We determine the amount of flow seasonally needed to be maintained in surface waters to protect stream ecosystems and aquatic habitat, to carry out these life histories. This flow is referred to as the conservation flow. In practice, when flows are below the conservation flow, no large water withdrawals or water diversions are permitted to allow, as they will create the situations I've just described. The in-stream conservation flow is a critical piece in protecting this water and sustaining the use of both the users of surface water for irrigation and other purpose, but also ensuring adequate water remains in the streams and our surface waters to protect the aquatic habitat and biota that depend on them. This is the bar set by the Vermont Water Quality Standards, and this is the program is required and needs to manage to. The proposals set forth in Act 173 by the study group and Capture 8466 were directed at maintaining and protecting our surface water for both uses and the in-stream use. That is the basis for our recommendations. It is with this background that I raise concerns regarding the amendment to H466 that specifically proposes to amend reporting section to include the language averaged over any 30-day period in a year, as it means an estimation of waters for the reporting in section 1042C. This change significantly changes the threshold for reporting and registering. In my opinion, undermines the intent and the effort to collect the baseline inventory water use data in the state, which is needed to develop an informed data-driven permitting program. As the proposed amendment to the threshold will only collect information from those users who average over 5,000 gallons per day in withdrawal over a 30-day period, I believe this is inconsistent with the agency's perspective on stream flow protection. As previously described in regulating stream flow, the agency's focused on instantaneous values of stream flow and prescribing conservation flows to protect aquatic habitat and biota. which is again codified in Vermont water quality standards. It's important that we collect the data at the level to understand the impacts. As proposed, an actor could withdraw large volumes of water several days from a stream during a low flow period. Maybe over the course of 3 days, it's 120,000. That would not trigger a need to report, yet that likely could be a serious impact in the damage to the ecosystem in violation of the Vermont water quality standards. No reporting would occur. Additionally, I'm concerned how this may result in further impacts to Vermont surface waters from the cumulative impacts of water withdrawal, or result in a significant underestimation of surface water use in the state. Both of these issues would not contribute to our understanding of the universe of water withdrawals and their impacts in the state of Vermont. Collecting the data to form a baseline inventory of the water use and what is currently happening on the landscape will allow us to develop this data-driven program to assure that sustained use for both the users of the surface water as well as maintaining adequate levels to protect our aquatic habitat and our biota. This was the intent of the Act 170 study group's proposal, to cast a wide net to ensure we create an accurate to base these decisions on. The Act 173 group heard from legal experts on the development of water use regulatory programs. One of the key messages they conveyed to the study group was to have it based on an accurate inventory of water use in the state. This was the focus of the Act 173 study group's proposal, and I respectfully request the committee reconsider the reporting threshold language that was proposed by the study group and that was passed by the House. This is the agency's preference to maintain this language as proposed by the Act 173 group. The Act 173 group, again, was comprised of members representing multiple sectors and interests. There were 10 meetings and several hours of discussions regarding the proposal put forth. As other members of the study group have testified, there was a great deal of agreement amongst the study group members on the proposal put forth. This includes the threshold of reporting requirements that any water withdrawal over 5,000 gallons within a 24-hour period, register and report that use. It was supported by the members with the technical background based in the state's knowledge of the state's hydrology, the ecology, and the Vermont water quality. This threshold and reporting language was thoroughly vetted by those appointed by the Act 173 study group, which brought with them decades of experience on this topic. As I share with the committee in my prior testimony, Vermont has an abundance of relatively small streams with an estimated 75% of our river miles occurring in drainages of less than 2 square miles. This is one of the key factors in why we chose this, and may be an issue when you try to compare to how we, the Act 173 group, chose to attack the threshold question versus what they may do in neighboring states. It also goes back to potentially differences in water quality standards and how we manage our waters. Again, this information is for reporting and registration and is needed to form the baseline inventory of water use in the state of Vermont. The volume of surface water withdrawal is currently unknown. Then we will use this data to develop permitting programs where there may be a needed. And following the testimony on H466, and as the stream flow protects the amount of active water withdrawals in the state that the agency has no record of. As a regulator, as an ecologist, this is concerning and speaks to the need to follow the proposal put forth by the Act 170 group to form an accurate inventory. Additionally, limiting any additional limiting of the data collected now will only limit the agency's ability to evaluate the potential cumulative impacts of multiple water withdrawals and our ability to produce surface waters. This has the potential to leave significant gaps in our understanding and negatively impact Vermont waters. And so again, respectfully request the committee's reconsidering of the proposal put forth by the Act 1773 study group. And with that, I thank you for the opportunity to testify. And as I said, we're happy to answer questions on this or other comments that we provided to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Crocker. Can you remind this committee about the charge, a little more to the charge of the working group? Did it ask to do an assessment of water quality and to develop a permitting program based on that assessment? Or I don't remember exactly how far it went. Like, I'm wondering if the permitting program was inherent in the original charge to the working group.
Yes, so it was to first evaluate the baseline data for waterwood use in the state of Vermont. We currently, don't have a registration reporting program. The second charge was to look at other regimes and to develop, where appropriate, a permitting program that will comply with the Vermont water quality standards and address the scale issues of watersheds, as well as in that work, analyze regimes that may work for the Vermont and propose those to the legislature. And so that is what we did as our 10-member study group that met over the course of 10 months last year. And we provided those findings to your committee on December 15th in our report.
Great. So yeah, let me pause just to say we are highly appreciative of all the work and the proposal, and knew that recognize that there's a lack of information here, and since water is held in public trust, that we have an obligation to manage it for everyone's well-being. So I think that most of the questions we've got originate with people in the farm community, particularly those who are irrigating crops. And I guess to be a little bit direct about it, they felt like they didn't have an opportunity to participate in shaping this bill adequately before we came to the Senate. So we're playing catch up a little bit here and hearing more testimony than I think was previously taken, and particularly for folks who are irrigating crops. That seems to be to bring it down to a fine point. That's where the rub is that we're hearing about. And so we're trying to find a path forward that works for those folks as well. Some of it has been that if they're required to meter above 5,000 gallons a day, for instance, that the cost of metering, I don't know anything about meters, but the figures we've been hearing were that for each line serving a field or something like that the cost would be around $5,000 per meter. And so we talked to people who had 6 main lines feeding fields. So they're saying, I'm a fruit and vegetable operation. I can't afford a $30,000 investment to report out to the state. So that's a very anecdotal and specific thing, but I think that story was repeated at different scales by different people. And that's part of why we're working on it right now. So I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, and I do, and thank you. I have listened to the testimony from the farmers and the people who are irrigating, and we are in support as an agency. They have testified, they keep the logs, they can provide accurate estimates. And we support that proposal going forward, that the metering not be required for those activities. It wasn't intended by the group to capture a lot of people in that upper threshold in terms of would have to pay for the meters themselves. But I think that also highlights how the committee or how the study group thoughts on the water volumes and how that could potentially impact the surface water itself, where we're looking at that 50,000 threshold of being this is significant amount of water that potentially can have real impacts on the in-stream ecosystem that, you know, from my position, I'm trying, you know, to protect and maintain, as well as, you know, manage their use.
Right. Well, I appreciate the difficulty of your position. I was reporting an Act 250 bill 10 days ago, whatever, and I said, one of our challenges as a committee is that there is no constituency in a certain way to come in and speak on its own behalf. When people have interests, they show up, but in terms of natural systems, they can't schedule a visit to the State House, and so we have to learn about it and try to manage from both sides. And it makes it a little, so the human tendency, I think, is to respond to human testimony on an impact that they're finding challenging. It's hard for us to know the biota impacts, even though we understand.
Yeah, no, and I want to just bring that to the committee's attention that, you know, the other side of this coin, and, you know, my concerns as someone who regulates the in-stream flow use. You know, I think from what we sent to the committee yesterday, you know, we're generally in favor of a lot of what was proposed by the farmers and the agricultural sector to help clarify the issues that we heard through the testimony.
So as I understand it, you've worked on some language in response, is this right? And you've been working on some amendment language, and do you have anything you want to share with the committee now? Or
I'll defer, to Jordan Gonda, my colleague here.
Okay. Do you want to screen share, Ms. Shanda?
Sure.
Okay.
I can definitely do that. And for the record, my name is Jordan Gonda. I'm an associate general counsel with the Department of Environmental Conservation. For the benefit of everyone in the room, as Jeff mentioned, ANR has been working with listening to the testimony before you, and also working in coordination with the Agency of Agriculture on some of the amendment language that was presented to you yesterday, in addition to some of the additional proposed revisions that I believe have been put forward by the Agency of Ag in a separately presented document. The agency has responded to some of those pieces in email, and we shared that with Senator Bray yesterday, as well as Legislative Council, and have also shared those comments with the Agency of Agriculture, just so we're all on the same page. I am happy to share my screen so we can all see what was sent. Bear with me, as don't commonly use Zoom, so I have to figure out how to do this. It's always fun to do it on the spot. So what I'm showing you is an email. And basically what this does is respond to, makes further proposed revisions on the Senate proposed changes to H66, which you Legislative Council walked you through yesterday. And then secondly, responds to and makes further proposed revisions to the separate revisions that Ryan Patch presented yesterday as well. Stepping back, just in summary, because this looks like a lot, except for the piece that Mr. Crocker just went over, which is the method of reporting withdrawals and the time period, 30-day, the issue with the average over 30-day period. That aside, most of this is relatively minor. And I guess I can walk through that, and I'll since Jeff just gave a great summary about the implications of changing that reporting period to an averaging component over a 30-day period. He just spoke to the impacts of that. I will continue on and just mention that the agency is proposing language to also the method of reporting withdrawals section of the amendment and the bill to allow for, there's a new provision that deals with methods of reporting withdrawals for irrigation or watering of livestock. ANR can agree to this proposed, this additional provision, but requests that estimation be allowed to be done either by an estimate of the total volume withdrawn based on log records, and this additional language underlined here, or pursuant to a technically appropriate method approved by the secretary. Again, as Jeff just mentioned, the agency is okay with the idea that any metering or estimation method that requires the type of expense that was discussed, we're okay with not relying on metering, but we would like the committee to consider the fact that log records that could be submitted with these estimates might vary from activity to activity. And we'd like to ensure some consistency in the data and the estimation of volume that we're going to receive as the agency. So we're not spending a lot of time computing or comparing apples and oranges. So we can kind of look at these each on their own and kind of have the same quality of information that we would need to consider. So a technically appropriate method, we could speak to folks that are maintaining these log records to figure out what their method of computation is, how they're estimating these in their logs, and come up with a standard that is workable, a standard that's familiar to the folks that are keeping those logs, but provide some consistency. So when that information is reported to the agency, we know what it says and we don't have to decipher and reformulate if this information is being kept differently. So that was the gist of that. The second suggestion we had was with respect to the permitting section of the Senate amendment. Just to add in, there's new language about general permits and the requirement that a general permit be issued to state and municipal infrastructure projects, I believe. And we just ask that the general permit language be amended to include the rate as well as a withdrawal volume. So not only the total volume, but how quickly it's being removed. Jeff spoke to that sort of instantaneous piece being important for purposes of identifying any injury to the stream itself. So rate and withdrawal. And then with respect to the additional agricultural agencies proposed revisions, again, there's I think a basis of agreement here, just with some minor tweaks. And I will highlight this section. We did, Agency of Natural Resources did, and you heard yesterday some some commentary from Legislative Council about the word springs being included in the definition of surface water. The agency emailed yesterday to say that we would be fine with changing the language, but just to clarify, we would propose using the term surface water springs to just differentiate that we're not talking about below ground springs and water that flow in springs below ground. We're really talking about once the spring water daylights and any use withdrawal of that wouldn't otherwise be exempted. I don't think we're talking about a whole lot of activity here, but again, it's still a question mark. And Jeff does know of at least one example where there has been withdrawals from daylighting springs that are not used for agriculture. So we would want to include that type of use in any reporting requirement. And I would just amend what we said here in our email, just to, for clarity, we can remove the word spring from the definition of surface water. It's really superfluous because there is a catch-all. The definition of surface water, if you have the bill before you, includes specific types of surface waters, but then there's catch-all language that mentions and all of their surface water bodies or similar. So we think that it's captured there, and it may be less confusing to just take it out, because we're really not talking about below ground springs. So hopefully that's helpful. And then again, relating to the definite, I think forgive me, this isn't tracking the language, but there was a suggestion or recommendation to modify, I think this is the exemption piece of surface water. So what surface waters are not related to farm ponds and other impoundments, just including the modifier off-stream farm ponds, just to help with the clarification efforts here. And there was one other recommendation from ANR regarding that new provision that the Agency of Agriculture proposed for the permitting section, sort of policy statement. It was more to help direct the structuring of the permitting program, and the Agency of Agriculture recommended language as regarding to sort of the de minimis or negligible, and wanted that as sort of a guiding statement to help the permitting program identify de minimis or negligible impacts, which was the intent, and the agency has no issue with that concept. It's my understanding after hearing the testimony yesterday that this provision might change. So I don't know if it's helpful to talk about this, but the agency, just with respect to any type of statement that touches this subject, to really just highlight that it's not the withdrawal by withdrawal, the individual activity, the withdrawal itself, it's the impact that withdrawal has on the stream that would help us determine whether the impact is de minimis or negligible. So it's a slight nuance, but it's consistent with how we look at impacts to stream flow, not as the specific withdrawal activity itself, not as the specific use, but the impact that use and that withdrawal is having cumulatively or on its own, depending on the situation in the surface water that's being impacted. So again, these are sort of, I think we're getting there in concept on some of these items, and we're happy to talk further about any new language that's put before you today. I'm happy to answer any questions about the agency's position on these pieces, or any other questions you have.
Well, thank you. So I sat in and I met with Mr. O'Grady end of day yesterday, and he already had I don't know if all this language, or I don't remember the exact timing of things. Everything's moving along. At any rate, we made the current amendment he just drafted, I think, which has gone to, the editors for review, includes some of the changes you've got here. I think the only thing that I remember specifically not including was that last section that was a suggestion from Agency of Agriculture Food Markets. It seems to me like it was creating a finding, and then it built policy based on that finding. And I didn't think that the finding was actually necessarily well substantiated, and so I wouldn't want to base policy on it. But maybe with the additional language you've brought forward, there's a way to come to an agreement there. All right, so that's very helpful. Thank you for sharing those edits. We will share with all interested parties the draft as soon as we have it out of drafting. And thank you for everyone for coming to work on this together in a way where I think we're all aiming for the right place. Protect waters held in public trust, protect all the living creatures that depend on that water, and allow for withdrawals for agriculture, but not to the detriment of the health of the stream. And so what we're learning is that when done right, that both the use of water, irrigation and livestock, and stream health can be maintained. And I think that's the shared goal that I think we all have. So with that, thank you.